Arthur Sterling was a man who measured his life in precision. As the CEO of Sterling Global, his world was defined by stock market fluctuations, high-stakes negotiations, and a home that ran like a Swiss watch. That home, a sprawling glass and steel mansion overlooking the Hudson River, was maintained by a woman named Martha. Martha had been with the family for 12 years. She was more than a maid, she was the ghost in the machine. She knew exactly how Arthur liked his coffee, 82 degrees Celsius, 2 drops of cream. She knew which silk ties his wife, Evelyn, preferred for charity galas, and she knew the exact bedtime routines of their teenage daughter, Sophie. Martha was silent, efficient, and, most importantly, invisible. "The gala is tonight, Arthur. Don't forget your cufflinks," Evelyn said, glancing at her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Martha already laid them out, dear," Arthur replied, checking his watch. "She's always one step ahead." As they left the house, Martha stood by the heavy oak door, her hands folded neatly over her apron. She offered a small, polite smile, a smile she had practiced in the mirror for a decade. As the tail lights of the limousine disappeared down the driveway, Martha's expression didn't fade. It sharpened. She didn't start cleaning the kitchen. She didn't vacuum the rugs. Instead, Martha walked directly to the library, Arthur's private sanctuary. She didn't turn on the lights. She moved through the darkness with the familiarity of someone who owned the air itself. She reached behind a row of leather-bound first editions, books Arthur bought for status but never read. Her fingers found a small, recessed panel in the woodwork. With a soft click, a tray slid out. It wasn't jewelry or money that it was a row of high-capacity hard drives and a tablet glowing with dozens of live camera feeds. Martha sat in Arthur's leather chair, the one he claimed was the seat of power. She put on a pair of noise-canceling headphones and began to listen to the recordings from that morning. "I'm telling you, Evelyn, the merger is risky. If the board finds out about the offshore accounts, we're finished." Arthur's voice echoed in her ears, crystal clear. Martha leaned back, a cold, calculated satisfaction washing over her. She wasn't just cleaning their floors, she was cataloging their sins. For 12 years, she had been the silent witness to every lie, every affair, and every financial crime committed within these walls, but tonight, Arthur had forgotten something. He had left his personal tablet in the study, the one synced to the house's new, smart security upgrade. An upgrade Martha hadn't fully integrated into her private system yet. Martha watched the feeds. A small red light began to blink on Arthur's forgotten tablet on the desk. It was a notification, unauthorized access, library panel. The bridge between Martha's secret world and Arthur's reality had just been crossed. The morning after the gala, the Sterling mansion felt different to Arthur. It wasn't something he could see, but rather a cold prickle on the back of his neck. He was sitting at the breakfast table, scrolling through his emails, when he remembered the notification from the night before, unauthorized access, library panel. He looked up as Martha entered the room, carrying a tray of fresh grapefruit and poached eggs. She moved with her usual grace, her footsteps making no sound on the polished marble. "Is everything all right, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice a soft, melodic hum. "You look troubled." Arthur studied her. Martha was in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled into a tight, professional bun. Her eyes were a pale, unreadable blue. To anyone else, she looked like the epitome of devotion. "Just a glitch in the new security system, Martha," Arthur said, trying to sound casual. "The sensors in the library went off last night while we were out. Probably just a technical error." Martha didn't blink. She set the plate down with surgical precision. "The house is old, sir. Even with the new upgrades, the wood settles. I'll make sure the technicians check the sensors this afternoon. Don't worry about it." "I'll handle it," Arthur replied. As Martha left the room, Arthur noticed something. On the edge of his placemat, there was a tiny, microscopic smudge of black dust. He touched it with his finger. It wasn't dust, it was graphite, the kind used to lubricate small hinges or locks. The library panel wasn't supposed to be lubricated by anyone but the manufacturer. Later that day, after Evelyn had left for her Pilates class and Sophie was at school, Arthur didn't go to the office. He stayed home, lurking in the shadows of his own house like a stranger. He waited until he heard the hum of the vacuum cleaner from the third floor. Martha was occupied that he slipped into the library and locked the door. He went to the bookshelf where the notification had originated. He began pulling books out, one by one. The Great Gatsby, War and Peace, The Wealth of Nations. Behind the third shelf, he found it. It wasn't just a panel, it was a sophisticated, custom-built housing unit. Using a letter opener, he pried the edge. It didn't lead to a safe full of gold or cash. It led to a series of wires that ran deep into the walls of the mansion. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He followed the wires with his eyes, realizing they didn't connect to the main security hub in the basement. They were separate. Private. He pulled out his phone and opened a professional signal detecting app he had used for corporate espionage sweeps. The screen turned red instantly. The room was hot. There were hidden microphones embedded in the crown molding, cameras hidden in the eyes of the family portraits, and sensors under the floorboards. "What is this?" he whispered to himself. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A message appeared on his screen, but it wasn't a text. It was a video file. He clicked it. The video showed a recording from 3 years ago. It was a video of Arthur in this very library, having a heated, secret phone call about an illegal offshore transfer. The quality was perfect. The audio was crisp. At the bottom of the screen, a watermark read, "File number 402, Arthur's Deception." Arthur felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't the master of this house. He was the star of a reality show he didn't know he was filming. From the hallway, Martha stood silently, her hand resting on the doorknob of the library. She didn't try to enter. She didn't knock. She simply listened to the sound of Arthur's heavy breathing through the earpiece hidden in her ear. She checked her watch. In exactly 4 minutes, Arthur would find the second file, the one involving his wife's secret. Martha smiled. The invisible maid was about to become the most powerful person in the room. She hadn't just been cleaning their house, she had been collecting their souls, one recording at a time. She walked away quietly, headed to the kitchen to prepare lunch. After all, a billionaire needs his strength when his world starts to crumble. Arthur sat on the floor of his library, surrounded by fallen books. The glowing screen in his hand felt like a poisonous snake. He clicked the next folder, file number 715, Evelyn's Escape. The video opened to a scene from 6 months ago. The camera angle was high, hidden perhaps in the chandelier of the master bedroom. It showed his wife, Evelyn, sitting on the edge of the bed, weeping. She was holding a burner phone, speaking in a low, trembling voice. "I can't do this anymore," Evelyn's voice came through the speakers. "Arthur thinks I'm at the charity foundation, but I've been visiting the clinic. If he finds out the truth about the medical bills, if he finds out I've been selling the family jewelry to cover my sister's debts, he'll divorce me." Arthur stared, paralyzed. He had noticed Evelyn's jewelry collection thinning, but she had told him they were in the bank vault for safety. Martha, who stood in the background of that very video, was seen in the reflection of the vanity mirror. She wasn't cleaning, she was standing perfectly still, watching Evelyn cry, her face devoid of any pity. Martha knew. Martha had always known. Arthur's shaking thumb swiped to the next folder, file number 902, Sophie's Rebellion. This one was recorded in their daughter's bedroom. Sophie, only 17, was shown talking to Martha. This wasn't a secret recording of a conversation, it was a conversation with Martha. "You won't tell him, will you, Martha?" Sophie asked, her eyes red from crying. "If Dad knows I failed my exams and spent the tuition money on that trip to London, he'll send me to boarding school in Switzerland." Martha's voice was motherly, soothing, completely different from her professional tone. "Of course not, dear. Your secret is safe with me. I've already adjusted the mail. Your father will see a forged transcript. I took care of it." Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. Martha wasn't just a spy, she was a puppet master. She was protecting his family members from him, and in doing so, she had bought their loyalty with lies. She had made herself the most essential person in the house by becoming the keeper of their shames. The confrontation begins. Arthur stood up, his legs feeling like lead. He realized that for 12 years, Martha hadn't been working for the Sterlings. The Sterlings had been living in Martha's laboratory. He walked out of the library, his footsteps heavy. He headed toward the kitchen. He expected to find Martha cooking, but the kitchen was empty. The stove was off. A single note sat on the marble island, written in elegant, cursive handwriting. Mr. Sterling, the tea is getting cold in the solarium. We should talk before the police arrive. Or before I press send on the global server. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. Global server. He ran toward the solarium, a glass-walled room at the back of the house. There sat Martha, perched in a wicker chair, sipping tea. She looked calm, almost regal. On the table in front of her was a laptop, its screen filled with progress bars and data packets ready for upload. Sit down, Arthur, she said, omitting the Mr. Sterling for the first time in over a decade. You look like you've seen a ghost. But we both know I've been right in front of you the whole time. Who are you? Arthur hissed, his voice cracking. What do you want? Money? I can give you millions. Martha laughed softly. It was a cold, dry sound. Money? Arthur, I've had access to your bank accounts for years. I've already taken what I needed for my retirement. This isn't about money. Then what? It's about balance, she replied, her eyes turning ice cold. You spent your life building an empire on the backs of people you considered invisible. You ignored your wife. You terrified your daughter. You cheated your partners. I decided to become the record keeper of your failures. She tapped a key on the laptop. If I press this, every news outlet in the country receives the evidence of your tax fraud, Evelyn's theft, and Sophie's scandals. The Sterling name becomes a punchline by dinner time. Arthur stood frozen in the solarium. The glass walls, which usually offered a breathtaking view of the estate, now felt like the walls of a transparent cage. He looked at Martha, the woman who had folded his laundry and served his meals, and realized he was looking at a total stranger. Balance? Arthur spat the word out. You're a sociopath, Martha. You've lived in our house, eaten our food, and all the while you were plotting to destroy us. Why? What did I ever do to you? Martha set her teacup down with a deliberate clink. It's not what you did to me, Arthur. It's what you did to the world. But if you want a personal reason, think back 30 years. Think of a small textile company called Miller & Sons. A company you restructured into oblivion. Arthur's face went pale. Miller & Sons. It was one of his first hostile takeovers. He had gutted the company, fired 200 employees, and sold the assets for a massive profit. It was the foundation of his wealth. My father was Elias Miller, Martha said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He spent 40 years building that business. When you destroyed it, you didn't just take his money. You took his dignity. He died 6 months later, broken and penniless. My mother followed shortly after. So this is revenge? Arthur asked, his voice trembling. 30 years later, you come for me as a maid. Revenge is a crude word, Martha replied. I prefer observation. I wanted to see if you were worth the life you took from them. I wanted to see if you were a good man behind closed doors. But you weren't. You are a hollow shell, Arthur. A man who treats his wife like an accessory and his daughter like a business investment. The sound of the heavy front door echoing through the house interrupted them. Voices drifted into the hallway. Evelyn and Sophie were home. Arthur. Martha. Why is the house so dark? Evelyn's voice called out. In here, Evelyn. Martha called back, her voice suddenly switching back to the polite, helpful tone she had used for 12 years. Arthur lunged toward the laptop, but Martha was faster. She pulled a small remote from her pocket and pointed it at him. Sit down. If my heart rate goes above 100 or if I press this button, the send command is executed instantly. Do you want your daughter to see the video of her father bribing a senator before she even says hello? Arthur collapsed back into his chair just as Evelyn and Sophie entered the solarium. What's going on? Sophie asked, sensing the thick tension in the room. She looked at her father's disheveled appearance and then at Martha, who was sitting in a chair she was never supposed to use. Martha? Why are you sitting there? Sit down, everyone, Arthur said, his voice sounding hollow. Martha has something to show us. The presentation of sins. Martha opened the laptop and turned it toward the family. She didn't show them the tax frauds or the briberies first. Instead, she played a montage that it was a split-screen video. On one side, Evelyn was shown hiding a diamond necklace in her purse to sell it. On the other side, Sophie was shown forged grades on a computer screen. In the middle, Arthur was shown on a secret phone call, mocking his wife's intelligence to a business partner. The room went deathly silent. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her throat where the necklace should have been. Sophie turned a ghostly shade of white, looking at her father with a mix of fear and shame. You've all been very busy, Martha said calmly. And you've all been lying to each other for a very long time. I haven't just been recording you. I've been managing you. I'm the one who redirected the private investigator Evelyn hired to tail Arthur. I'm the one who deleted the emails from Sophie's school. I've kept this family together, but now, the price of my silence has changed. What do you want? Evelyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. Martha leaned forward. I want the house. I want the Sterling estate. And I want you all to leave. Tonight. With nothing but the clothes on your backs. The silence in the solarium was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway, a clock Martha had wound every morning for 4,000 days. Now, each tick sounded like a hammer against a coffin nail. The house? Arthur finally found his voice, though it was thin and raspy. You want the estate? This property is worth $40 million, Martha. You can't just take it. I'm not taking it, Arthur, Martha replied, her eyes fixed on the progress bar on her screen. You are gifting it to a charitable trust I've established in my father's name. A trust for the families of workers displaced by corporate restructuring. If you sign the transfer papers, which are already printed and waiting on the desk, the files stay encrypted. If you don't, I hit enter, and by tomorrow morning, you will be a prisoner, Evelyn will be a social pariah, and Sophie will have no future. A family divided. Evelyn turned to Arthur, her eyes wide with terror. Arthur, sign it. Sign whatever she wants. I can't go to jail. I can't let the world see those videos of me. You sold the family heirlooms, Evelyn. Arthur roared, his fear finally turning into rage. You stole from me. And Sophie, you've been lying about your education for years. I was paying $50,000 a semester for you to party in London. Don't you dare judge us. Sophie screamed back, her voice cracking. We saw the video. You called Mom a useless ornament. You're a criminal, Dad. You've been cheating the government for decades. You're the reason we're in this mess. Martha watched them with a look of detached curiosity, like a scientist watching rats in a maze. It's fascinating, she mused. Even now, as your world burns, you choose to burn each other first. Martha stood up and walked to the sideboard. She poured herself another cup of tea, her back turned to them. It was a gesture of supreme confidence. She knew they were too broken to attack her. 1 hour, Martha said, glancing at her watch. In 60 minutes, I want you out of my house. I have a car waiting to take you to a motel. Not a 5-star resort, Arthur. A motel. You'll have to learn to live on the modest savings account I've left in your name, just enough to keep you from starving, but not enough to ever buy influence again. Arthur looked at the papers on the desk. His hand trembled as he reached for a pen. Everything he had built, the glass walls, the reputation, the power, was being erased by the woman who used to polish his shoes. "Wait," Arthur said, his hand stopping inches from the paper. He looked up at Martha. "There's one thing you missed, Martha. You've been watching the cameras, listening to the mics. But you weren't there 20 years ago. You don't know about the blue folder." Martha's eyebrow arched slightly. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "The blue folder? I've searched every inch of this house. There is no blue folder." Arthur let out a dry, haunting laugh. "That's because it's not in the house. It's in a safe deposit box that requires a physical key and a biometric scan. And in that folder, Martha, is the proof of who actually signed the orders to gut Miller and Sons." Martha's grip on her teacup tightened. "It wasn't just me," Arthur whispered, a predatory glint returning to his eyes. "There was a silent partner. Someone who wanted your father's company even more than I did. Someone you've been protecting for years without even knowing it." Chapter 6. The architect of ruin. The air in the solarium grew cold as Arthur's words hung in the air. Martha, who had been the picture of calm, didn't move. Her pale eyes remained fixed on Arthur, but the slight tremor in her hand as she held the teacup betrayed her. "A silent partner?" Martha asked, her voice regaining its steady, cold edge. "You're lying. You're desperate, Arthur. You're pulling at threads to save your crumbling kingdom." "Am I?" Arthur leaned forward, ignoring the laptop, ignoring his weeping wife and terrified daughter. "Why do you think a young, hungry businessman like I was back then had the capital to buy out a firm like Miller and Sons? I was a shark, yes, but I needed the water to swim in. Someone provided the funds. Someone who knew your father intimately. Someone who knew his weaknesses before I ever stepped foot in his office." Evelyn looked between them, her face streaked with mascara. "Arthur, what are you talking about? Who was it?" Arthur didn't look at his wife. He kept his gaze locked on Martha. "The blue folder contains the bank transfer records. It contains the signed agreement from a man named Julian Vane. Do you remember that name, Martha?" Martha's face turned the color of ash. "Julian. Uncle Julian?" "The very same," Arthur smiled, a cruel, jagged expression. "Your father's best friend. His business partner. He's the one who tipped me off that your father was struggling. He's the one who suggested I liquidate the pensions to make the deal sweeter. I was the executioner, Martha. But Julian Vane was the judge." For the first time in 12 years, Martha felt the floor shifting beneath her. She had spent over a decade meticulously documenting the Sterling sins, convinced that Arthur was the sole source of her family's tragedy. "Julian died 5 years ago," Martha whispered, her voice cracking. "He was the one who helped me find this job. He was the one who told me you were the man responsible." "Of course he did." Arthur laughed, a sound devoid of mirth. "What better way to hide his own guilt than to point you at me? He placed you here. He wanted you to watch me, to hate me, so you would never look at him. He used your grief as a weapon to keep his own secrets buried." The power dynamic in the room began to vibrate. The 60-minute timer on Martha's laptop was still counting down, 52 minutes remaining, but the certainty of the invisible maid was flickering. The family's choice Sophie, who had been silent, suddenly stood up. She walked over to the laptop. Her eyes were hard, no longer filled with the tears of a teenager, but the cold calculation of a Sterling. "If Martha hits send, we all go down," Sophie said, her voice eerily calm. "But if what Dad says is true, Martha has been a puppet just like us. Julian Vane's estate still exists. His children are living in luxury in London on the money he stole from Martha's father." Sophie looked at Martha. "You want justice? Or do you just want to hurt the person Julian told you to hurt? Because if you destroy us now, the real thief, the man who betrayed your father's friendship, gets away with it forever." His name stays clean while yours becomes a footnote in our scandal. Martha looked at the laptop, then at the transfer papers. Her thumb hovered over the remote control. The blue folder, Martha said, her voice low. Where is the key? I'll take you to it, Arthur said, sensing an opening. But first, you close those servers. You delete the files on my wife and daughter. We settle this between us, professional to professional. The tension in the solarium was so thick it felt physical. Martha's thumb remained poised over the send button, but her eyes were no longer those of a predator, they were the eyes of a woman who had just realized she had been living in a house of mirrors. Delete the files first, Arthur. You think I'm a fool? Martha's voice was shaky, but her logic remained sharp. We go to the bank. I see the documents. If Julian Vane's signature is on those papers, I will reconsider. But until then, my system stays live. Fine, Arthur snapped. Evelyn, Sophie, stay here. Don't touch anything. I'm not staying here. Evelyn cried out, clutching her silk robe. What if she has a partner? What if the police are already on their way? No one is coming unless I call them, Martha said, standing up. She grabbed her laptop and tucked it under her arm. Arthur, we take your car. I drive. The hidden frequency as they walked toward the garage, Martha's tablet, the one she used to monitor the house's hidden mics, emitted a high-pitched, rhythmic chirp. She stopped dead in her tracks in the darkened hallway. What is it? Arthur asked, his hand on the door to the garage. Quiet, Martha hissed. She adjusted the frequency on the tablet. A distorted audio feed began to play. It wasn't coming from inside the house. It was a signal being transmitted into the house from the perimeter. Target is moving toward the garage. The maid is with him. They have the laptop. Move to intercept at the gate. Arthur's heart plummeted. That's not my security team. No, Martha whispered, her face pale. That's a tactical frequency. Someone else has been piggybacking on my surveillance network. For how long, I don't know. Arthur looked at Martha, a realization dawning on him. Julian Vane's estate. I told you, Martha, Julian was a judge, but he wasn't the only one involved. If his family found out you were getting close to the truth, they wouldn't just wait for you to find a folder. They would eliminate the evidence. The breach suddenly, the massive glass windows of the solarium shattered. The sound was like a bomb going off. Sophie's scream echoed through the house, followed by the heavy thud of boots on marble. They're inside. Evelyn shrieked from the other room. The garage, now. Arthur yelled, grabbing Martha's arm. They scrambled into the black armored SUV. Martha threw the laptop into the passenger seat and slammed the vehicle into reverse. As the garage door began to grind upward, the headlights illuminated three figures dressed in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by gas masks. They weren't police, they were private contractors, mercenaries. Hold on. Martha screamed, she floored the accelerator. The SUV roared to life, tires screeching against the concrete. She didn't wait for the garage door to fully open. The heavy vehicle smashed through the bottom panels, sending splinters of wood and metal flying. As they tore down the long, winding driveway, bullets began to spark against the reinforced glass of the SUV. They're trying to kill us. Arthur gasped, ducking low. They don't want the folder, Martha. They want you. You're the only one who can link the Vane family to the original crime. I have 12 years of their data on this laptop. Martha yelled over the roar of the engine. I didn't just record you, Arthur. I recorded every visitor, every delivery, every friend of the family who walked through those doors. I have Julian's son on tape from last Christmas, discussing the legacy funds. The realization Martha realized then that her perfect plan had a fatal flaw. By becoming the person who knew everything, she had made herself the most dangerous witness in the world. And in the world of high finance, witnesses don't retire, they disappear. The bank is 20 minutes away, Arthur said, checking the side mirror. A black sedan was gaining on them, its headlights flickering like a predator's eyes. If we don't make it to that vault, we both die tonight, and the truth dies with us. Martha looked at Arthur, the man she had hated for a decade, and then at the road ahead. For the first time, they weren't master and servant. They were two ghosts from the past, running for their lives. The black sedan roared behind them, weaving through the midnight traffic like a shadow. Martha gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She drove with a cold, calculated aggression that Arthur had never seen. She wasn't just a maid, she was a woman who had spent years studying every detail, every route, and every vulnerability of the Sterling's world. "They're gaining on us," Arthur yelled, looking at the glowing red lights of the sedan in the side mirror. "Turn left on 5th. The precinct is only 4 blocks away." "No," Martha shouted back. "If we go to the police, the Vanes will have the files suppressed before we even reach a desk." "The police are part of the network, Arthur. How do you think your tax fraud stayed hidden for so long?" "We go to the bank. It's the only neutral ground left." She swerved the heavy SUV through a narrow alleyway, the side mirrors clipping a trash can with a violent thud. The sedan followed, relentless. The standoff at the gates. They skidded to a halt in front of the Manhattan Trust Building, a monolithic structure of granite and gold. Martha didn't wait. She grabbed the laptop, and Arthur grabbed the heavy brass key he had taken from the library's hidden compartment. They sprinted toward the entrance just as the sedan doors flew open. Two men in suits, not tactical gear this time, but expensive, tailored Italian wool, stepped out. They didn't pull guns. They pulled out badges. "Mr. Sterling. Martha Miller." "Stop right there," one of them shouted. "Federal agents. We have a warrant for that hardware." "They're lying," Arthur hissed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Look at their shoes. Feds don't wear $4,000 loafers. Those are Vane's fixers." Arthur slammed his palm against the glass door's biometric scanner. "Access denied. The system is locked for the night." Arthur panicked. "Step aside," Martha commanded. She opened her laptop and plugged a bypass cable into the building's external maintenance port. Her fingers flew across the keys. "I've been practicing on your home security for a decade, Arthur. A bank is just a bigger box." With a heavy thunk, the electromagnetic locks disengaged. They tumbled inside the lobby just as a bullet shattered the glass panel behind them. Deep into the earth the bank was silent, smelling of cold stone and old money. They ran past the teller stations toward the elevators that led to the sub-basement vaults. "The blue folder, Arthur. Tell me the truth," Martha demanded as the elevator descended. "Is Julian Vane really the one who signed it? Or is this another one of your games to save your skin?" "I couldn't have done it without him, Martha," Arthur said, leaning against the elevator wall. He looked older. The facade of the powerful billionaire completely stripped away. "Your father was a genius, but he was stubborn. He wouldn't sell. Julian came to me and said, 'If you break him, I'll give you the keys to the city.' I was young. I was greedy. But Julian, he was his best friend. He knew exactly where to twist the knife." The elevator doors opened to the vault room. It was a forest of steel boxes. Arthur led her to box 882. He inserted the key, pressed his thumb to the scanner, and the heavy door swung open. Inside was a single, dust-covered blue folder, the ultimate betrayal. Martha snatched the folder and flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the documents, the wire transfers, the signed memos, the secret agreements, but as she reached the final page, she stopped. Her breath hitched. "This isn't just Julian's signature," she whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of horror. "What?" Arthur asked, stepping closer. Martha turned the page toward him. There, at the bottom of the liquidation order that had destroyed her father's life, were two signatures. The first was Julian Vane. The second was Elias Miller. My father?" Martha staggered back. He signed his own destruction. He didn't sign his destruction, Martha, Arthur said softly, realization dawning on him as he looked at the date. He sold the company out from under his employees. He took a secret payout. He didn't die penniless because I robbed him. He died because he gambled that payout away in the months after the merger. The silence in the vault was absolute. 12 years of revenge, 12 years of spying, 12 years of hating Arthur Sterling, all based on the lie that her father was a martyr. He wasn't a victim. He was a co-conspirator who had been outplayed by his own greed. Everything, Martha whispered, the laptop slipping from her hand. My whole life, it was for nothing. Behind them, the heavy vault door began to creak. The men in the Italian suits had found them. But Martha didn't move. She just stared at her father's signature, the ink a dark reminder that the people we think are saints are often just better at hiding their shadows. The vault felt like a tomb. The cold, sterile light reflected off the rows of safety deposit boxes, casting long, distorted shadows. Martha stood frozen, the blue folder clutched in her hands. The signature of her father, Elias Miller, felt like a brand on her soul. He wasn't the hero I remembered, she whispered. Her voice was hollow, stripped of the fire that had fueled her for a decade. He sold them out. His own workers, people who had been at his side for 20 years. We all have a price, Martha, Arthur said, his voice unusually gentle. Your father found his. Julian found his. And I found mine. The heavy steel door of the vault room groaned as it swung wider. The two men in the Italian suits stepped inside. They didn't have their guns drawn anymore, instead, they moved with the eerie, professional calm of men who knew they had already won. Between them stood a third man. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from marble. This was Marcus Vane, Julian's son, the negotiator. A touching family reunion, Marcus said, his voice smooth and resonant. He looked at Martha with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Martha, you've been a very busy woman. 12 years under the Sterling's roof. That shows a level of dedication that is frankly wasted on domestic service. Martha didn't look up. You knew. You knew your father and mine were in it together. Of course, Marcus replied, stepping into the center of the room. And I've spent a great deal of money ensuring that the rest of the world didn't know. Arthur, I must say, I'm disappointed. You were supposed to keep the past buried. Instead, you led a disgruntled maid right to the heart of the secret. She wasn't just a maid, Arthur snapped, standing his ground. She was a ghost I didn't know I was haunted by. Marcus turned his attention back to Martha. The laptop, Martha. Give it to me. In exchange, you walk out of here. No police, no accidents on the way home. You can take the money you've already diverted from Arthur's accounts, consider it a bonus for your years of service, and disappear. Change your name. Start over. The burden of power. Martha finally looked up. Her eyes were red, but the shock was beginning to harden into a cold, dangerous clarity. She looked at the laptop lying on the floor, then at Arthur, and finally at Marcus Vane. And if I don't? She asked. Marcus smiled, but his eyes remained dead. Then the send command you're so proud of works both ways. My hackers have already traced your server. If you release the Sterling files, I release the files on you. I'll make sure you're framed for the very crimes Arthur committed. You'll spend the rest of your life in a cell, and the world will still think your father was a thief. Arthur looked at Martha. He saw the calculation in her eyes. He realized that they were both trapped in a cycle that had started before they ever met. Martha, don't, Arthur said. If you give him that laptop, he wins. He keeps the Vane name clean while we all rot in our own secrets. And if I don't give it to him, we all rot anyway. Martha screamed, her voice echoing off the steel walls. There is no clean anymore, Arthur. Look at us. A crooked billionaire, a legacy-obsessed shark, and a maid who spent her life watching other people live because she was too obsessed with a dead man's lie. The final move. Martha reached down and picked up the laptop. She didn't hand it to Marcus. She opened it. "The server is still active," she said, her fingers hovering over the keys. "I have 42 minutes left on the timer. But I'm not going to send the Sterling files to the press." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What are you doing?" "I'm adding a new recipient," Martha said, a ghost of a smile appearing on her lips. "I'm sending everything, the Sterling tax frauds, the Vane-Miller merger records, and the evidence of your fixers attacking us tonight, to a very specific person." "Who?" Marcus hissed. "Myself," Martha replied. "But not to my email. I'm uploading it to a public blockchain. It can't be deleted. It can't be suppressed. And it will be unlocked automatically if I don't check in every 24 hours. She looked at Marcus, then at Arthur. "I am the insurance policy now," Martha declared. "If anything happens to me, if I so much as trip on a sidewalk, the world learns everything. About all of us." The ride back to the Sterling mansion was draped in a suffocating silence. Martha drove Arthur's SUV, her eyes fixed on the road, while Arthur sat in the passenger seat, staring at his own reflection in the window. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck only to realize he was stranded on a deserted island. Marcus Vane and his men had been left in the bank vault, paralyzed by the digital, dead man switch Martha had created. She had effectively turned herself into a walking nuclear option. As long as she lived, their secrets were safe. If she died, their empires would turn to ash. They pulled into the long, winding driveway of the estate, the headlights swept over the broken glass of the solarium. The house, once a symbol of untouchable power, now looked like a crime scene. The family face-off inside, the lights were all on. Evelyn and Sophie were sitting in the grand foyer, huddled together on a velvet sofa. They looked up as Arthur and Martha entered. Evelyn stood up, her voice trembling. "Is it over? Did you stop her?" Arthur didn't answer. He walked past his wife toward the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a glass of scotch with a shaking hand. "It's not over, Evelyn," Martha said, stepping into the center of the foyer. She was still wearing her maid's uniform, but she stood with a posture that commanded the room. "The dynamic has simply changed. I am no longer your employee." "Then get out." Sophie snapped, though her eyes were filled with fear. "You've ruined everything. My school, my reputation, everything." "I didn't ruin it, Sophie," Martha said calmly. "I simply stopped hiding the ruins you created for yourselves. I've spent 12 years cleaning up your messes, both the dirt on your floors and the stains on your souls. I'm done with the floors. The terms of the new life." Martha set her laptop on the marble table. "Here is how it will be. Arthur, you will remain the CEO of Sterling Global, but you will begin the process of liquidating the Vane assets. You will use that money to fund the trust for the families your father and mine destroyed. If you don't, the blockchain unlocks." She turned to Evelyn. "And you? No more stolen jewelry. No more lies about where the money goes. You will face your sister's debts honestly. If you attempt to flee or hide assets, the blockchain unlocks." Finally, she looked at Sophie. "And you will go back to school. Not with a forged transcript, but with the grades you actually earned. You will learn what it means to work for something. Who do you think you are?" Evelyn whispered. You're a maid." "No," Arthur interrupted, his voice heavy with defeat. "She's the owner of this family now." The final cleaning. Martha walked upstairs to the small, windowless room she had occupied for over a decade. It was sparse, a bed, a lamp, and a small photo of her parents. She looked at her father's face in the picture. He wasn't the saint she thought he was. He was a flawed, greedy man who had betrayed his own people. She took the photo out of the frame and tore it into small pieces. She packed her single suitcase. She didn't take any of the expensive gifts the Sterlings had given her over the years. She only took her clothes and her laptop. As she walked back down the grand staircase, she saw the family standing in the foyer. They were looking at her not with hatred, but with a desperate, pathetic kind of dependence. They were so used to her managing their lives that they didn't know how to exist without her, even as she held a digital gun to their heads. "The house is a mess," Martha said, glancing at the shattered glass in the solarium. "I suggest you hire a cleaning crew. But choose carefully, you never know who might be listening." Martha walked out the front door and didn't look back. She had spent 12 years as a shadow, a silent observer of the rich and their rot. Now, she was stepping into the light, not as a victim or a servant, but as the architect of a new, uncomfortable truth. 3 months had passed since the night the glass shattered in the Sterling mansion. On the surface, the world of the ultra-rich looked unchanged. Arthur Sterling still appeared on the cover of financial magazines, Evelyn still attended the most exclusive galas, and Sophie was enrolled in a new university, but inside the house, the air was different. It was thin, cold, and smelled of quiet desperation. Arthur sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. Every morning at 8 a.m., he had to perform a digital handshake, a coded check-in that sent a signal to Martha's encrypted server. If he missed it, or if Martha didn't acknowledge it within an hour, the blockchain would release the Sterling vein files. He was a billionaire, but he was also a prisoner on a digital leash. The invisible warden Martha was no longer in the house, but she was everywhere. She lived in a modest apartment in the city, far from the gilded cages of the Hudson. She spent her days managing the Miller Foundation, the trust she had forced Arthur to fund. She was no longer wearing a black and white uniform. She wore sharp, tailored suits. Yet, she found herself waking up at 5 a.m. every day, her hands twitching to straighten a rug or polish a surface. The habits of a servant were harder to break than the chains of a master. One afternoon, a knock came at her door. It wasn't Arthur, and it wasn't the vein fixers. It was a man named Leo, a former floor manager from Miller and Sons, one of the men her father had betrayed. "I heard you were the one behind the new foundation, Martha," Leo said, looking around her apartment. "People are saying you found the money Elias lost. They're saying you're a hero." Martha felt a sharp pang of guilt. "The money was recovered from bad investments, Leo. It belongs to the families." Leo leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Some people are saying you didn't just find the money. They say you have a way to make the big guys jump. They want more, Martha. They want blood. They want the names of everyone who signed those papers 30 years ago." Martha felt a chill. "The names don't matter anymore, Leo. The money is what counts." "Names always matter," Leo replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There are people who would pay a lot to get their hands on whatever evidence you're holding. Dangerous people." The corruption of power. After Leo left, Martha sat at her laptop. She looked at the folders, the thousands of hours of recordings. She realized she was doing exactly what Arthur had done. She was hoarding power. She was using secrets to control people, justified by her own sense of justice. She checked the morning's logs. She saw Arthur's digital handshake. She saw Evelyn's credit card statements, which she still monitored to ensure no excessive luxury spending. She saw Sophie's GPS location at the university library. She was no longer the maid. She was the warden of a private prison. Suddenly, a red alert flashed on her screen. "System breach detected." Someone wasn't trying to delete the files. They were trying to clone them. The veins had found a specialist. The digital gun she was holding to their heads was about to be turned into a weapon for someone else. The final realization. Martha realized that as long as the files existed, no one was truly free, not the Sterlings, and certainly not her. She had become obsessed with the very rot she sought to expose. She was spending her life watching a billionaire's bank account instead of living her own life. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in weeks. "Arthur," she said when he picked up. "Martha? Is something wrong?" "I did the handshake. I followed the protocol." Arthur's voice was frantic, the sound of a man who lived in constant fear. "I'm coming to the house," Martha said. "Gather Evelyn and Sophie. It's time for the final cleaning." The drive to the Sterling mansion felt like a journey through a graveyard. As Martha approached the iron gates, they swung open automatically. The security system recognized her, or rather, it feared her. She walked into the foyer, and for the first time in 12 years, she didn't look at the dust on the baseboards. She didn't notice the smudge on the glass. She looked at the three people waiting for her. They were standing in the center of the grand hall, looking like statues in a museum of their own failures. "You're here," Arthur said. He looked exhausted. The sharp, aggressive businessman was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he had spent 3 months staring into the sun. "I am," Martha replied. She set her laptop on the mahogany table, the very table where she used to serve dinner. "The Vanes are trying to breach the server. They've hired someone from the outside. If they get the files, they won't use them for justice. They'll use them to replace you as the masters of this city's shadow. So what do we do?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "Do we run?" "No," Martha said, her eyes sweeping over them. "We do something you've never done in your lives. We tell the truth before someone else tells it for us." Martha turned the laptop toward them. "I have prepared a final document. It is a full confession. It details the tax fraud, the Vane-Miller merger, the offshore accounts, and the surveillance. It's signed by me as the witness. If you sign it as the participants, we go to the district attorney tonight." "Are you insane?" Arthur whispered. "We'll go to prison." "You're already in prison, Arthur." Martha shouted, her voice finally breaking the cold facade. "Look at you. You can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't look at your wife without seeing a recording. You're living in a glass house where the windows are painted black. Is this the success you built?" Sophie stepped forward. She looked at the laptop, then at her parents. "She's right. I can't keep going to class knowing that everyone who smiles at me is only doing it because they haven't seen the real version of me yet. I'm sick of the secrets." Before Arthur could respond, the front door was kicked open with a violent crash. The siege of the secrets. It wasn't the police. It was Marcus Vane, and he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 2 men carrying heavy electronic equipment and a third man, the specialist Martha had detected. "The time for digital games is over, Martha," Marcus said, stepping into the hall. He looked at the laptop on the table. "My man here is going to mirror that drive right now. And once we have it, the blockchain doesn't matter. We'll have the keys to every vault in this city." "You're too late, Marcus," Martha said, her finger hovering over a specific key. "Don't do it." Marcus yelled, signaling his men to move forward. "If you delete it, you lose your leverage. They'll kill you." "I don't care about leverage anymore," Martha said. She looked at Arthur. "Sign it. Now." In a moment of pure, desperate clarity, Arthur Sterling grabbed the digital pen. He signed. Then Evelyn. Then Sophie. The document was encrypted and sent directly to the 3 major news outlets and the FBI's white-collar crime division. "There," Martha whispered. "The secrets are dead. Now there's only the truth." The dust settles. Marcus Vane stood frozen. He realized that the leverage he had sought was now public record. His father's signature, the illegal transfers, the bribery, it was all screaming across the internet. The power of the invisible shadow was gone because the shadow had turned on the lights. Sirens began to wail in the distance, the sound of the real world finally arriving to collect the debts of the Sterlings and the Vanes. Martha picked up her laptop. She looked at Arthur one last time. "I spent 12 years wondering what it would feel like to destroy you. But I realized that I was only destroying myself by staying in this house. Where will you go?" Arthur asked as the blue and red lights began to flash against the windows. "Somewhere where I don't have to clean up after anyone," Martha said. She walked out the door as the federal agents moved in. She didn't look back at the mansion. She didn't look at the billionaire who was being handcuffed in his own foyer. She walked down the driveway, the cool night air feeling like the first real breath she had taken in a decade. Epilogue. The Mirror. 1 year later, Martha sat in a small cafe in a different city. She had a different name, a different life. She worked as a librarian, a place where she still organized things, but where the stories belonged to everyone, not just the elite. She picked up a newspaper. On the front page was a small article about the Sterling Vane trials. Arthur was serving 10 years. Evelyn was under house arrest. Sophie had started a non-profit for displaced workers. Martha smiled. She realized that she hadn't just been a maid who learned too much. She had been the mirror that the Sterlings were too afraid to look into. And once they were forced to see themselves, the house of cards had no choice but to fall. She closed the paper, left a tip on the table, a generous one, and walked out into a world that was no longer hidden in the shadows.